Good morning. Welcome to another Seize the Day. Today is Thursday, May the 19th, and I am speaking to you from the Portland, Oregon airport. I got up really early this morning and took a red eye, actually late last night on Wednesday. And so I arrived here. It's very early in the morning. And I thought, well, I would just get started and just have devotions before the rest of the world wakes up. And I thought, what better place to do it right in the middle of the airport? So if some people pass by, so be it. But I thought this would be a great way to begin my day. And so before I get going, I just thought I would invite you to be just a part of my day. I'm going to be speaking at a church in Sisters, Oregon, which is up near Mount Bachelor, not far from where my son Jared passed away in that kayak accident about a year and a half ago. When I was up here at that time, I got to speak at a church, and they asked me if I would come back again. They are in the midst of doing a merger, and they asked me if I would come and preside at their very first service that they're going to have jointly. So I agreed to do that. And so I thought I would just get a head start, be able to spend Thursday and Friday with my grandsons. And then Friday, Saturday through Wednesday, I will be speaking at a conference for them. So I'm really excited about that. Feel that much of the experience that I've garnered from Bethany is something I'd just like to share. And so God just opened up this door for me to do that. So I'm grateful to be here today. And we have been looking at a passage of scripture where Jesus performs this miracle of calming the winds and the waves. And part of that miracle, I wanted to couch in terms of this major question, right? So today, if I haven't said it already, as you're waking up, this is Thursday, May 19th, and I trust that you're feeling refreshed and ready to begin your day. As we've been looking through these passages, the 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 end of this miracle that Jesus that we read about with Jesus calming the winds and the waves is a passage where it ends with the disciples taking a look at Jesus and wondering, what kind of man is this? As we've said throughout our study in the book of Matthew, right? Matthew is all about giving us an indication as to who the person of Jesus really is. It's his way of making us more and more aware that Jesus is the promised Messiah that was to come. And because of that, we ought to be getting more and more of a sense of comfort in understanding what his will and his ways are. Because he's going to call us to a deeper level of discipleship, right? He wants us to be that salt of the earth, the light of the world. Think about it. He's come not only to proclaim the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but he's also come so that you and I, what does it say? It says that you and I would become this salt of the earth, the light of the world. And so consequently for you and me, the more we understand who Jesus is, the greater that sense of understanding and hopefully this confidence to know that Jesus will never leave or forsake, right? So if that's the case, then for you and me, as we're beginning to just look more and more into the scriptures, we're going to find that there's going to be a deeper level of comfort for you and for me. And hopefully that's evidenced in the way in which we live out our life with a great deal more security, confidence, a great deal of hope for the future. And so we don't feel so overwhelmed. Well, in this situation, the disciples have been already treated to a side of Jesus, not only in his teaching, but in his miracles. They've seen Jesus in action. And now we came to that one place in Matthew 8, right, verses 18 through 27, where we had these disciples or, wannabe disciples coming up to Jesus, and it didn't seem to fare so well. There was a reluctance. For one, he was overeager. The other guy was undereager. And in both of those situations, it didn't seem like they got in the boat and went with Jesus on this trip to the other side. We don't read about them in the story of the storm that came up. But one of the things that we do want to take notice of is the fact that this scene has been told over and over again in the Old Testament, recounting of the time when God would part the Red Sea. It was a wonderful, wonderful passage that's found in Psalm 107, verses 25 through 30. And as I'm sitting here, I'm going to open up my Bible here and put it up so I can read it for you. And it's found in Psalm and 107. So sorry about that, but here we go. So it says in Psalm 107, around verse 25, it says, "For he spoke and stirred up a tempest that lifted high the waves. They mounted up to the heavens and went down to the depths. In their peril, their courage melted away." Sounds an awful lot like what was taking place in this boat, right? And then it says, "They reeled and staggered like drunken men. They were at their wits' end. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he brought them out of their distress." And then listen to this text. It's 107, verse 29. It says, "He stilled the storm with a whisper. The waves of the sea were hushed. They were glad when it grew calm, and he guided them to their desired haven." So all of these words are just kind of reinforcing what God has been doing in that act of deliverance during the great Exodus out of Egypt. And I just want to draw that reference because, see, that reference is also giving you some understanding now about what Jesus is doing. Jesus, in the text that we're looking at, is the one who now is in this boat, and he's the one who is, stilling the storm to a whisper and the waves of the sea to a hush. And when he does that, the disciples in the boat, they're terrified. They're just trying to get their hands around who is this one who even the winds and the waves obey him. Because see, up to this point, all of this, understanding of one who can control nature in such a way is God himself. And now we're having Jesus in this miracle demonstrate that he is Lord over creation. We're going to see other sides of him in his ministry as that continues to move on. But for right now, that was a place and a time when the disciples are now just getting a broader view of who this Jesus is. Well, I thought when we were talking about a storm, I thought it would be good maybe to also take a look at the book of Jonah and see how God manifested himself in this storm. And I thought that would be another way for you and me to just come to a better understanding of what this prayer is supposed to be all about, and that would help us, I think, to just lean in a little bit more in terms of what these passages are trying to teach to us. So let's look at Jonah and the first couple of verses here. It says, "The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, and when that word came to him, that word was meant. God had a work that he was going to give to Jonah, right? He wanted him to go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it because its wickedness had come up before him. But what happens? Jonah runs away. And when Jonah runs away, he moves in a complete opposite direction. So here the word of the Lord comes to Jonah, telling him that he has an assignment for him. He wants him to go up to this great city of Nineveh, part of the great Assyrian Empire at the time. It's a large city, a wealthy city, and God says, "I want you to preach against it." But Jonah runs away, and he heads in the entire opposite direction. He goes west when he should have been going east, and he finds a ship, and he feels, "I'm just sailing out of here." And then what does God do? But God sends a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatens to break up. All the sailors are afraid. Everybody's crying out to his God, and they throw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. So this is no easy storm. Only this is not on the Sea of Galilee. This is on the Mediterranean Sea. And so they're fearing for their lives. They're throwing things overboard just to keep the ship afloat. But it said that Jonah had gone below deck where he lay down and fell into this deep sleep. And so it was the captain of the ship that wakes him up and says, "How can you sleep? Get up, call on your God. Maybe he'll take notice of us and we'll not perish." Because they're beyond anything that they see that they can do, right? It's beyond their abilities at this juncture. Even the sailors come and they start talking to each other. He says, "Come, let us cast lots to find out who's responsible for this calamity." In their understanding of the world, they're thinking maybe one of them has angered the gods, right? And so this is the reason for this calamity. But God brought that storm to bear to get Jonah's attention. And so they come, they cast a lot, and it falls on Jonah. Verse 8 of chapter 1 and Jonah says, they asked him, "Tell us, who's responsible for making all this trouble for us? What do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? For what people are you?" And I want you to take a notice here of what Jonah says. Jonah answers him saying, "I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land." Do you understand that for Jonah, he understood who he was? Jonah had a really good understanding of his own identity, and he also understood who God was. He's the Lord of heaven. He's the one who made the land and the sea. I was speaking with such a conviction, it seems like it terrified the sailors, because they're saying, that, "What is it that you've done?" Because they knew that he was running away from the Lord because he already had told them so. And by now, the sea, it says in verse 11, is getting rougher and rougher. And so they ask him, "What should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us?" And notice what Jonah says. In verse 12, he says, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea, and it will become calm. I know that this is my fault, that this great storm has come upon you." And instead, notice the men don't want to do that. They were already afraid at the boldness by which Jonah spoke, and instead the men did their best to row back to the land. But verse 13 says they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. And so they cried out to the Lord, "Oh Lord, please do not let us die for taking this man's life. Don't hold us accountable for killing an innocent man for you. Oh Lord, for you, oh Lord, have done as you pleased." But then notice in verse 15, it says they took Jonah, they threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. And at this, notice what happens. The men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. Jonah doesn't want to go and preach to the people in Nineveh. And he's so reluctant about following the ways of God that he's doing everything he can not to engage. And yet God sends this storm, and the complete opposite happens. Jonah is giving a testimony about God in his actions, and these men, they see the result of that. They see the seas grow calm and the winds die down, and they recognize that the God that Jonah was talking about is the one who is responsible for all of this. It it'll be interesting to see in eternity what really happened to these gentlemen. Maybe their lives really did turn around. But then notice here it says, then the Lord then provided a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was inside the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Well, Jesus acknowledges the truth of this statement in the Gospels, right? He tells us that that just as Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man will be, in the tomb, and then on the third day he will rise again. But I want you to think a little bit this morning with me about this storm. That storm that came up on the Sea of Galilee for the disciples. It really took them by surprise, and it shook them to their core. And then when they saw how Jesus responded to that storm and the power that he exhibited, it moved them to a place where now they began to just look at Jesus a little bit differently. They're asking the question, what kind of man is this? So it demonstrates to me, right, that the storm was really a tool in God's hand to just teach another lesson. The lesson was brought to bear when Jesus stood up and calmed the winds and the waves. But while that storm was raging, it was also it was part of this lesson that God was demonstrating through his Son that he just sent. And so I'm thinking about Jonah, and I'm thinking, okay, God sent this storm because of Jonah's rebellion. In the midst of that whole storm, he gets an opportunity to witness to those on board without really his heart in it. He's not concerned about the sailors. He's just matter of factly telling them, what's going on, and it has this effect on these men's lives, especially when they see the storm subside and the winds die down. So I put this thought together this morning, and I thought, is it possible that the storms raging in our day could be brought by God so that the church, God's people, may have assumed a posture similar to Jonah? Like, I think of the days in which we're living and all the calamities that come. People are always looking for an answer. Just this past week, right, we had this terrible shooting in Buffalo. We have the news on a constant basis of the war that's in Ukraine. I mean, there's evil that's all around us. And I just think, why are these storms coming? Why does it seem like they're just coming one right after another, one right after the other? And I think, what is the church doing? Has the church assumed the posture similar to Jonah, that we're hiding? Like, meanwhile, the storms are raging, and maybe there are some who are assuming the same posture that Jonah is. I wonder if the church is sleeping while the storm around us is raging. Is the church choosing to ignore the storm and the role God is calling them to fulfill? See, Jonah understood why that storm was there, and he had an answer. Believers now who understand something of what Jesus is doing and the way in which he is working out in this world, we also have some answers, don't we? We have been called to be this salt and this light. And I wonder sometimes if the church is choosing to ignore the storms and the role that God is calling us to fulfill, a calling on our life really to proclaim something of the kingdom of heaven that God, through his Son Jesus, is introducing. I wonder if the church, like Jonah, may be too content just to know who they are Like I'm a follower of Jesus. I believe in Jesus. We know who Jesus is. He's the Son of God, right? He's the one who's been born, conceived of the Spirit, born of the Virgin, was crucified, dead, buried, and rose on the third day. Well, Jonah gave a really good answer when they asked him, "Who are you? What are you doing here? Why is the storm raging?" Jonah had a really good answer for him. He knew who he was. I'm a Hebrew, and I serve the Lord of heaven, the creator of the wind and the seas. We can do that too, but we could do it like Jonah, where we're refusing to engage the world around them. Jonah knew all of that, but he was running away from God. He was running away, and God was trying to get his attention with the storm. And I wonder if we're running away sometimes because we don't think, well, we just wonder if it's really going to make a difference. That maybe the world is beyond reaching. Maybe we don't care enough. That seems to be the case with Jonah. He had no desire. He did not want to go and preach to the Ninevites. He'd rather suffer this death on a storm. So when I'm thinking now of what is taking place, in the life of Jonah, and then I think about those disciples that are sitting on a boat. I'll just wait for this announcement. When I think of these disciples sitting in that boat, and then I recognize that Jonah is in the midst of a storm that he brought on, that his reluctance is not really addressing the storm around him, and actually has brought people into a position where great harm could come. I just wonder, those disciples that are going to be on that boat with Jesus, God is going to use them to go out into the world and to do the things that he has done. They're going to go and they're going to bring a message of peace. They're going to be required to be strong, even in the face of great opposition. They're going to experience what it means to be insulted and persecuted. And yet, through their efforts, they're going to change the world in which they've been living. And the proof of that is you and I. We're still we're opening up the scriptures together, trying to learn more and more about who the will and purposes of God really are. So for you and me, when we look at these passages now, I just wonder, maybe we ought to just take a moment and think about the storms that are raging around us, recognizing the one who can calm the winds and the seas of these storms. And instead of running and hiding and being afraid, maybe God is asking us to step out, to be this witness that he's called us to be, to show this level of kindness and engagement in the world around us, so that people won't falter, they won't fall away. I think that God is calling us not to just to continue to increase a knowledge about God, but that we're expressing what it really means to have a tangible experience with this God who is filled with power, promises us the same spirit of power and of love, so that we go out into the world and we do make a difference. We just, in the sphere in which we find ourselves, you're a neighbor, you're someone who's concerned. I look at this storm that the disciples experienced, and God used that to just speak into their life a little bit more about the will and purposes of the one who created all things. And now I think We're in the world, and their storms are all around us. Are we going to rest in the power and in the purposes of God? Are we going to find peace in Him so that we lean into this calling that He's placed on our life? When I think of those first two chapters there of Jonah, Jonah will pray for a deliverance. He's going to ask God to come alongside him and deliver him from what he is seeing as certain death. Because listen to this prayer here. Look what's being said. Jonah is inside the belly of this fish, and he says, "In my distress I called out to the Lord, and He answered me. From the depths of the grave I called for help, and You listened to my cry." And by the way, this storm was brought upon Jonah himself. So now he is suffering the consequences of his actions. God brings a fish to rescue him, and now he's calling out for mercy. He says here in verse 3, he says, "You hurled me into the deep, into the very heart of the seas, and the currents swirled about me. All Your waves and breakers swept over me." He says, I have been banished from Your sight, yet I will look again towards Your holy temple. The engulfing waters threatened me. The deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. What a picture that is. He says, "To the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath me barred in forever. But You brought my life up from the pit, O Lord my God. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered You, and my prayer rose to You, to Your holy temple. Those who cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs. But I, with a song of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to You. What I have vowed, I will make good. Salvation comes from the Lord." All of this prayer, I want you to notice, you spend some time reading it for yourself, and you realize there's not a whole lot of repentance here. Again, it's a recognizing that God is in control. But in verse 8, he says, "Those who cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs." There's a note of judgment in that. I mean, Jonah's running away in his faith. He's not running towards God. He's not trying to fulfill God's will and purposes. He's running away. And so he says here, I'm going to sacrifice to You. I will fulfill the vow that I made. And God sees just this glimmer that maybe Jonah's heart is beginning to soften. Maybe he really is going to take this step. Maybe the storm really did teach him something. And what does God do? He has Jonah vomited out onto dry land. Jonah is going to fulfill the purposes that God asked him in the beginning. Tomorrow we'll look at chapters 3 and 4. They're almost a mirror to the first two chapters as well. And it comes with a really strong kind of question at the end of this short story. Today, it's all about the storm. It's all about the comfort level that we have in the one who can quiet that storm. All of which is meant for you and me to go out into a world and bear witness that we know the one who hushes the winds and quiets the seas. And we live like that. And by doing that, we bring hope. We shed light to those all around us. My friends, go out and seize the day, recognizing that God is good all the time. And we'll just continue to just remember that He's good, and take these opportunities as God presents them. So if you have some time today, finish reading the book of Jonah, and then tomorrow we'll pick it up with the last two chapters. God bless you. Thanks for being with me this morning. As you can tell, kind of quiet here at the airport, but I'm glad I got to spend it with you. God bless. See you tomorrow, Lord willing. Bye.